With retail release hitting today, I figured it would be a good time to go through how I would upgrade starting with the Emerald Ruby starter deck. We will be starting with the stock starter deck and then go through 3 different levels where I tried to split into good cost to value upgrades in each level that everyone can focus on. Here is the Emerald Ruby starter deck as is. We do start off with quite a few cards that we will keep through the life cycle and even build onto more, including Duke of Wesselton, Opportunist Official, Mad Hatter, Gracious Host, Mother Knows Best, and Pongo Ol' Rascal. The Emerald Ruby starter deck is often looked at as on the bottom of the starter deck so far, but I really think it has a nice upgrade path and can be a very budget-friendly start. Let's jump into level 1 for this deck. We start off this level by adding the first handful of cards that are introducing our main strategy, which is this evasive penalty for challenging our character's strat, where we want to be questing constantly. Starting off with new adds, we have 2 copies of Cheshire Cat Not All There, which quests for 2 lore, and when he is challenged and banished, you get to banish the challenging character. We also add 1 copy of Flynn Rider Charming Rogue. This is another penalty for challenging him card, where if he is challenged, the opposing player discards a card. We add 2 copies of Goofy Daredevil, which quests for 2 and also has evasive, meaning only characters with evasive can challenge him. We also add our first copy of Kuzco Temperamental Emperor, which quests for 3, has ward so he can't be chosen except a challenge, and then when he is challenged and banished, the challenging character is also banished. We also add 1 copy of Han Scheming Prince, who is just a great 4-drop that quests for lore. Our final new card is Tinkerbell Most Helpful, who quests for 2 lore, has evasive, and when played you can give another character evasive for the turn. The cards we are increasing in quantity starts with Cruella de Vil Miserable as Usual, which goes from 1 copy to 2 copies. She only quests for 1, but when she is challenged and banished, you can return the character that challenged her to that player's hand. We also go from 1 to 2 of LeFou Instigator, which when played lets you ready a chosen character, but that character can't quest for the rest of the turn. We go from 3 copies to 4 copies of Pongo Ol' Rascal, which is another one of our evasive characters who quests for 2 lore. To make room for these additions, we cut out both copies of Captain Colonel's Lieutenant. This card is just not that good and doesn't fit the strategy we're going for. Same goes for Megara Pulling the Strings, which we cut all 3 copies of. We also cut all 3 copies of Rapunzel Letting Down Her Hair. This card just doesn't have a good enough effect to warrant such a high cost. We drop both copies of Stolen Scimitar, which doesn't fit our theme since we want to be questing more than challenging. Our final cut is both copies of Vicious Betrayal for the same reasoning as Stolen Scimitar. This jump to level 1 gets us started on our strategy while only costing about $20, which I think is a great starting point. That's basically just buying 2 starter decks, and this level 1 deck would be better than 2 of any of the starter decks. Level 2 is where we really start pushing harder into our strategies, and is also the biggest price jump of any of the levels at about $28. We only introduce 1 new card in this level, which is 2 copies of Genie on the Job, which is another evasive character who quests for 2 lore, but also when he's played, he gets to return a character to that player's hand. We add 1 more copy each of Cheshire Cat Not All There, Cruella de Vil Miserable as Usual, Duke of Wesselton Opportunist Official, Goofy Daredevil, Peter Pan Never Landing, Kuzco Temperamental Emperor, LeFou Instigator, and Tinkerbell Most Helpful. We add 2 more copies each of Flynn Rider Charming Rogue and Han Scheming Prince, both going up to 3 copies apiece. To make room for these cards, we drop both copies of Donald Duck Boisterous Fowl, who just gets replaced by our better 2-drops that fit this strategy. The only real reason this card stayed for the jump to level 1 is it was only a 1 cost and it was inkable. We drop all 3 copies of Horace No Good Scoundrel. Like Donald Duck, this card is just outclassed by the 3 drops we added this level. We also drop the 1 copy of Iago Loudmouthed Parrot because it just doesn't fit the strategy of this deck. Scar, Fiery Usurper, and Stitch Abomination are both cut because they're both top-end cards, and our push this level jump is getting out smaller characters with evasive or that punish our opponent for challenging them. We also drop both copies of He's Got a Sword, which, like the cards we dropped in our jump to level 1, just focuses on challenging more than questing. Finally, we dropped the 2 copies of Stampede because it's just too situational. While this jump is the most expensive jump, I also think it's well worth the price as we are getting up to 3 copies of the majority of our key cards. The third level jump is another $20 jump, but I believe really gets us to that great budget deck. In this level, we are rounding out our key cards to 4 copies each, including Cheshire Cat Not All There, Cruella de Vil Miserable as Usual, Duke of Wesselton Opportunist Official, Flynn Rider Charming Rogue, Goofy Daredevil, Han Scheming Prince, Kuzco Temperamental Emperor, LeFou Instigator, Peter Pan Never Landing, and Tinkerbell Most Helpful. These cards are some of the core cards in this deck, and getting 4 of each of them really improves our deck's consistency. To go up to 4 copies in all of these, we had to start off by cutting our Aladdin line. While that line is decent and has a good payoff with Aladdin Heroic Outlaw, this was the point in this deck to get hyper focused on evasives and punishing opponents for challenging. We also cut both copies of Shield of Virtue. I think this is a card that if you wanted to, you could keep in and cut the 2 copies of Jasper, Common Crook. I went back and forth on these two, but ultimately liked the control aspect of Jasper a little bit more. We cut our 1 copy of Steal from the Rich. While this card encourages questing, it's a 5-cost non-inkable card, and only having 1 in to start made this an easier cut. Our final cut was going from 3 copies to 2 copies of Sergeant Tibbs' Courageous Cat. Sergeant Tibbs is a great budget 1-cost 2/2 line, and that's why we keep him in here with 2 copies. At this point, you were about $85 into this deck, and with the Lorcana market the way it is, I think this is an excellent budget deck and will honestly compete with most decks. If you want to see where I would take this deck next, please let me know in the comments down below. I'm thinking about a follow-up that takes this deck to the final non-budget version, but don't know if that's something people want to see.